Attention! This makes absolutely no sense. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Zander's Facts.
Hello everybody, hello my fellow Americans, if you're not American. Welcome into the latest edition of the Zander's Facts podcast. I am of course the aforementioned Zander. It is Wednesday, March 13th, 2024. This is episode 135 of the Zander's Facts podcast. Thank you all so much for listening. We have got a massive podcast this week, talking about two big things that I want to discuss this week. We are going to start the podcast with politics, talking about a certain speech that happened last week. If you didn't realize, the State of the Union happened last week. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the biggest moments from that and what it all means, because it is an election year, and we're going to be talking about that a lot more in the coming weeks, months on this podcast. But also, stay tuned, because after that, it is Champ Week, y'all. College basketball conference tournaments, one of my favorite weeks of the year. You've got great basketball on from noon until like 1 a.m. It's amazing, and it all leads up to Sunday, 6 p.m., when we learn the bracket for the NCAA men's basketball tournament. So I got some predictions for the big conference tournaments to give y'all. You might want to stay tuned for all that. We'll get to all that in just a second. Before we do, just wanted to remind you all that if you like the Zander's Facts podcast, if you think you're going to like all the facts on this week's edition, I think you will. But just remember to follow this podcast on your podcasting app. Download this episode to your device, rate and review the podcast as well, and check us out on all the socials. I'm on Threads, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, at Zander's Facts. That's Zander with a Z. And most importantly, remember to tell all your friends, y'all. Spread the facts, as we like to say. Tell all your friends about the podcast, the newsletter, Zander's Weekend Facts. If you don't know, it's a recap of the week's top headlines that comes out every Sunday morning. It is free. You can sign up to get it in your email when it comes out if you go to the link in this episode's description. And also, you should check out the Zander's Facts link tree, which is also linked to this episode's description, because it has all the Zander's Facts links that you need for the podcast, for the newsletter, for everything you need. And also remember to listen to any of our past 134 episodes. If you didn't listen last week, we took a look at the history of grocery stores, and we talked about Kroger and Albertsons, the two largest grocery store chains in America who are trying to merge. I talked about why, I don't know, that might not be such a great idea. You know, you should go listen to that podcast from last week, episode 134. But as I said, we got a ton to talk about on episode 135, so let's get to it. We are going to start with politics. Washington, D.C., Mr. President. We are talking about the State of the Union. Friends, did y'all see the big speech last week? Because for the fourth, and what could be final time, President Joe Biden took part in his annual address to Congress last week. And boy, let me tell y'all, I wasn't planning on talking about it on this podcast, but I thought about it and I was like, I got a lot to say. I got a lot to discuss, and I got a lot to share with y'all. So that's what I'm going to try and do this week. I've actually gone back into the archives of this podcast to find the last time we talked about a State of the Union address, and we didn't even talk about the last two that occurred, I don't think, on this podcast. We talked about his first address to Congress, which was episode 14, back in May of 2021, 3 years ago, y'all, 121 episodes ago. So it's been a while. And by the way, the first address that the president gives to Congress is not technically called the State of the Union. It's just a joint session of Congress. So this is the first State of the Union we are dissecting on this podcast. But it's important because it is a presidential election year. It's 2024, so we should probably talk about it. So why don't we do that? Because coming in to the speech, when Biden gave it on Thursday night, many, at least from what I've been hearing, had very low expectations. Of course, you know, the people who said that may have been the millions of people who, since Biden became president, have only been exposed to clips that show him stumbling, falling off a bike, messing up his words, which have all happened. But pretty ironic when a lot of those people are going to go vote for the other guy, and he isn't exactly a wordsmith or very balanced mentally or physically. But The speech that Biden gave on Thursday night likely wouldn't make you think of those characteristics that I just said when thinking about him. And I think that there are times this week that I was doing the research and I was like, man, I wish this was a video podcast. I wish there was a video component to this because I got some stuff to show y'all. But I do think we have a good opportunity on this audio medium, on this podcast this week, to not watch the speech, but only to listen to what he says. Because I think if you come in with an open mind, you hold your past judgments, he's old, he's sleepy, he's a puppet, I don't know, some people say he's too conservative, some people say he's too liberal. If you come in with an open mind and just listen to the speech and how it was given, you might come out with a different viewpoint. Which I'm not trying to sway you in any sort of way, I'm just saying that's probably how you should actually come into this. And then you can come out and say, oh, I hate him, I love him, whatever. So, this week, we are going to be listening to some of the more notable portions of the speech. I'm going to be explaining the background of some of the stuff, everything you need to know about the State of the Union from last week, and how it affects the presidential election that is coming up in just a couple months, I guess, because it's March. We've got till November. Let's get to the facts. Let's start.
Zander's Facts.
I got a bunch of clips here to play y'all for you. It's kind of a clip show, so get ready, because we're going to be listening to a lot of good old Sleepy Joe. So, the first few minutes of Biden's speech, I just wanted to play how he immediately starts, because he comes into the chamber, it's supposed to start at 9 o'clock, he came in after 9 o'clock, and then he takes 20 minutes going down the aisle, shaking everybody's hand, having a conversation with everybody. That man loves Congress, y'all. Listen, it took a while. So he finally got up there and then started his speech. And I think that the first few minutes of listening to the speech kind of gives you a good idea of what he wanted to portray and how the speech went overall. So let's just listen here to how the State of the Union address began.
In January 1941, Franklin Roosevelt came to this chamber to speak to the nation. And he said, I address you at a moment unprecedented in the history of the Union. Hitler was on the march. War was raging in Europe. President Roosevelt's purpose was to wake up Congress and alert the American people that this was no ordinary time. Freedom and democracy were under assault in the world. Tonight, I come to this same chamber to address the nation. Now, it's we who face an unprecedented moment in the history of the Union. And yes, my purpose tonight is to wake up the Congress and alert the American people that this is no ordinary moment either. Not since President Lincoln and the Civil War have freedom and democracy been under assault at home as they are today. What makes our moment rare is that freedom and democracy are under attack both at home and overseas at the very same time. Overseas, Putin of Russia is on the march, invading Ukraine and sowing chaos throughout Europe and beyond. If anybody in this room thinks Putin will stop at Ukraine, I assure you he will not. But Ukraine can stop Putin. Ukraine can stop Putin if we stand with Ukraine and provide the weapons that needs to defend itself. That is all Ukraine is asking. They're not asking for American soldiers. In fact, there are no American soldiers at war in Ukraine, and I'm determined to keep it that way. But now, assistance to Ukraine is being blocked by those who want to walk away from our world leadership. It wasn't long ago when a Republican president named Ronald Reagan thundered, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Now my predecessor, a former Republican president, tells Putin, quote, do whatever the hell you want. That's a quote. A former president actually said that bowing down to a Russian leader, I think it's outrageous, it's dangerous, and it's unacceptable.
So immediately, to start the speech, Biden went to foreign policy, which is, if you know State of the Unions, you've seen a bunch of them, you know that presidents usually don't start off their addresses to Congress and the American people that are watched by tens of millions of people every year with foreign policy. But he did get one of the few standing ovations of the night by everyone in the chamber when, just after that clip, he introduced the Prime Minister of Sweden, who that day was in Washington because he signed the papers to join NATO, which is pretty cool. But from the beginning, you can sense how Biden and those who wrote his speech wanted this address to go. He spoke confidently, very little stutter, although there was some stutter in this. But by the way, y'all, anybody who mocks clearly has no clue that the man has had a stutter all his life. It's not just because he's 82 years old. He has had a stutter all 82 years of his life. And he showed that he might have already broken those low expectations already by the start of the speech. But what he also did was something very rare in this type of forum. He referenced not just the president who came before him, but who was also now his main opponent in this year's presidential election, because the State of the Union came at basically a perfect time for that, because Super Tuesday was also last week, and at that point, Nikki Haley drops out, and so now we know, I mean, if you've been paying attention, you've known for months, years probably, but now we really officially know that it's Trump and Biden. They're the two nominees. That's going to be the general election. And so that happened just 2 days prior. And so I don't know the timeline for how this speech gets written, but listen, y'all, he was talking about him a lot. He did not say, he never said the words, Donald Trump. He did say the words, my predecessor, though, as he did in that clip. He said them a total of 13 times throughout the speech, and I think he made light of his predecessor a lot more than that, too. Because as we're going to see, he did make light of the actions he's taken as president, you know, why you should vote for him, but he also proved once again, if you didn't know, this was kind of easy to tell, I would say, but State of the Union address also basically confirmed the suspicions that Trump, and keeping him out of the White House, is going to be a central message to the Biden campaign again. Just like it was 4 years ago, it's going to be again in 2024. So let's play another clip here, because when Biden was discussing the economy, he talked about one of the laws that Democrats were able to pass in the 2 years they controlled Congress, which is not right now, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, and that produced a pretty funny moment. Take a listen.
And thanks to our bipartisan infrastructure law, 46,000 new projects have been announced all across your communities. And by the way, I noticed some of you strongly voted against it, or they're cheering on that money coming in. I like it. I'm with you. I'm with you. If any of you don't want that money in your district, just let me know.
So that point kind of served as, you know, for those who like to complain, like Biden's predecessor, that the only time Biden sounds actually competent is when he's reading off the teleprompter. Well, that was just one time when he went off script during that speech. You can literally read what the prepared remarks were online, so you know when he went off script, because you can read what he was supposed to say online. And that quip about the Republicans cheering on the money from the infrastructure bill that they voted against wasn't in the script, which is something they do. You can look on Twitter from yesterday. Elise Stefanik, who's a Republican congresswoman from New York, who was part of the leadership in the Republican Party in the House, just yesterday talked about getting this funding for this project in New York. And everybody was like, well, that came from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, which you voted against. But now you're saying, oh my gosh, this is so incredible. Look at what I did. But if it was up to people like you, if there were more people like you, it wouldn't have passed. So,
Oops.
That's all that. Biden did the same thing. He went off script while he was on the topic of abortion. Listen to this clip that has since gone viral.
Many of you in this chamber and my predecessor are promising to pass a national ban on reproductive freedom. My God, what freedom else would you take away? Look, It's a decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. The Supreme Court majority wrote the following, and with all due respect, justices, women are not without electoral power. Electoral or political power. You're about to realize just how much you're right about that.
So yeah, he isn't the greatest orator. He screwed up in that address. He kind of mumbled his way through the ending because then they started clapping. But again, I'm not sure anybody who hasn't screwed up a speech. I screw up this podcast all the time. That's why it's pre-recorded, and I'm probably messing up right now. You're probably listening to the fifth take that I'm doing of this. And, you know, you want to talk about screwing up speeches, certainly not Biden's predecessor would ever screw up a speech. No way, as we'll learn later. But also, on that topic, Biden talked about prescription drugs, including the price of insulin and the price of prescription drugs elsewhere, not in the U.S. Let's listen to that.
Americans pay more for prescription drugs than anywhere in the world. It's wrong, and I'm ending it. With a law that I proposed and signed, not one of you Republican buddies voted for it. We finally beat Big Pharma. Instead of paying $400 a month or thereabouts for insulin with diabetes, and it only costs $10 to make, they only get paid $35 a month now and still make a healthy profit. And but what to do next? I want to cap the cost of insulin at $35 a month for every American who needs it. Everyone. It's now time to go further and give Medicare the power to negotiate lower prices for 500 different drugs over the next decade. We're making a lot of money, guys. And they'll still be extremely profitable. Will not only save lives, it will save taxpayers another $200 billion. Starting next year, the same law caps total prescription drug costs for seniors on Medicare at $2,000 a year, even for expensive cancer drugs that cost $10,000, $12,000, $15,000. Now I want to cap prescription drug costs at $2,000 a year for everyone. Folks, I'm going to get in trouble for saying that, but if you want to get an Air Force One and fly to Toronto, Berlin, Moscow, even Moscow, probably. And bring your prescription with you, and I promise you I'll get it for you for 40% the cost you're paying now. Same company, same drug, same place.
I think you kind of get the gist here. Biden was fired up once again, and he went off script, and he talked about Moscow, which is probably true. Probably is cheaper to get prescription drugs in Berlin and Toronto and Moscow, because I don't know if you've realized, but they're pretty expensive in the US. So that's something that he was talking about. And he also talked about taxes, including making millionaires and corporations, what he says, pay their fair share. And he also brought up tax cuts that were passed under the last administration, his predecessor.
But here's the deal. The last administration enacted a $2 trillion tax cut, overwhelmingly benefit the top 1%, the very wealthy and the biggest corporations, and exploded the federal deficit. They added more to the national debt than any presidential term in American history. Check the numbers. Folks at home, does anybody really think the tax code is fair? Do you really think the wealthy and big corporations need another $2 trillion tax break? I sure don't. I'm going to keep fighting like hell to make it fair. Under my plan, nobody earning less than $400,000 a year will pay an additional penny in federal taxes. Nobody, not one penny. And they haven't yet.
And then Biden brought up Social Security and Medicare, which produced a viral moment in last year's address, and he almost repeated that this year, talking about that also with the tax cuts. Listen to a clip that's probably going to be replayed later in campaign ads.
Many of my friends on the other side of the aisle want to put Social Security on the chopping block. If anyone here tries to cut Social Security or Medicare or raise the retirement age, I will stop you. The working people who built this country pay more into Social Security than millionaires and billionaires do. It's not fair. We have two ways to go. Republicans can cut Social Security and give more tax breaks to the wealthy. That's the proposal. Oh, no. You guys don't want another $2 trillion tax cut? I kind of thought that's what your plan was. Well, that's good to hear. You're not going to cut another $2 trillion for the super wealth. That's good to hear.
Buddies, listen, you would think that after last year's defining moment where Biden took advantage of the Republicans heckling and booing him into goading them to not make any cuts to Medicare or Social Security, because if you remember, they were doing the budget negotiations last year. We were scared we were going to default on our debt. The government was going to shut down. And there were Republicans, Rick Scott, who said we should sunset Social Security or Medicare or cut them or what have you. And Biden goes out there in his speech and is like, they want to do this. And then everybody's booing. And he's like, oh, so you don't want to do it. And yet they fell for it again with the tax cuts. Of course, if Biden's not president next year, because here's the thing, the tax cuts that were passed in 2017 under Trump expire next year. Congress has to renew them. The president has to sign them if they want them to take effect again. Biden, obviously, because most of them went to the wealthy and corporations, is not going to re-sign them. Donnie Boy, I don't know. He probably will. They were one of his signature things that he passed. So I'm thinking he will. So that's what really Biden was talking about. I mean, I guess they didn't learn from last year. Y'all remember the heckling again. Y'all remember 10 years ago, Barack Obama giving the State of the Union, one of the Republican congressmen yelled, "You lie." And oh my gosh, it was a horrible thing. The leadership in the Republican Party made him call Obama and apologize. And now everybody can just heckle the president. It's interesting how things have changed in the last 10 years. And then we get to the border and immigration, which may have been the defining subject right now, because if you trust the polls, immigration is one of, if not the most important issue at the moment. So I've got several clips to play from this section, starting out with Biden talking about the immigration bill that was in Congress but did not pass last month. Let's listen.
In November, my team began serious negotiation with a bipartisan group of senators. The result was a bipartisan bill with the toughest set of border security reforms we've ever seen. Oh, you don't think so? Oh, you don't like that bill, huh? That conservatives got together and said it was a good bill? I'll be darned. That's amazing. That bipartisan bill would hire 1,500 more security agents and officers, 100 more immigration judges to help tackle the backload of 2 million cases, 4,300 more asylum officers, and new policies so they can resolve cases in 6 months instead of 6 years now.
So we actually talked about this on a recent episode of the podcast. We talked about immigration to the southern border. If you don't remember, you should go listen to that podcast if you don't remember. But if you don't recall, bipartisan negotiations were taking place on a bill regarding the southern border, and it would have done what Biden said. And at the end of that clip, this is one of the reasons why I wish this was a video medium, but you can see the video. At the end of that clip, a Republican Senator, James Lankford from Oklahoma, who helped lead negotiations on the Republican side of that bill, was caught mouthing the words, quote unquote, "That's true," after Biden just talked about all the things that bill would have done. So, why, you may ask, did the bill die in Congress? Because Republicans apparently are very everybody cares about immigration. Republicans really want to do something on the border. Democrats do now too. Why did it die? Well, apparently, Joe Biden has an answer for us. Let's listen.
It will also give me and any new president new emergency authority to temporarily shut down the border when the number of migrants at the border is overwhelming. The Border Patrol Union has endorsed this bill. The Federal Chamber of Commerce is, yeah. You're saying low. Look at the facts. I know you know how to read. I believe that given the opportunity for a majority in the House and Senate would endorse the bill as well, a majority right now. But unfortunately, politics has derailed this bill so far. I'm told my predecessor called members of Congress in the Senate to demand they block the bill. He feels political win, he viewed it as a political win for me and a political loser for him. It's not about him, it's not about me.
Oh, buddy, thank you, Sleepy Joe. We gotta do audio clip, buddy. Look at the facts.
Zander's facts?
That's gonna be a good one. But yes, it's true that it was not Democrats who killed the bill. It was Mr. Donny Boy himself. Oh my gosh. From NBC News on February 7th, if you don't believe me. The article begins, quote, within 48 hours of the release of a long-awaited immigration and foreign aid bill he had championed, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell's Republican conference rejected his pitch to support it, knifed the deal, and left it for dead. Just 4 Republicans voted for it. In the end, even McConnell backtracked and voted against the package that he had helped develop. It was a jarring moment on Capitol Hill that pointed to a changed landscape. The Kentucky Republican, a one-man power center for more than a decade, is seeing his influence with fellow senators wane as his party continues to transform into the right-wing populist mold of Donald Trump. The former president who fiercely opposed the border deal and has long pushed fellow Republicans to turn away from McConnell is cruising to a 3rd consecutive GOP presidential nomination, unquote. Donny Boy called him up, said, no, I don't want to do that. And so that's the reason tougher immigration laws are not currently in place, because Republicans. Oh my gosh. And then right after that, Biden flubbed a part of his speech, as he did a couple times, leading Republicans like Marjorie Taylor Greene, star of the show, seen in a beautiful red, crisp MAGA hat on the House floor, which is against the rules, by the way, to heckle him. Here's what happened.
I'd be a winner. Not really. Lincoln Riley, an innocent young woman who was killed by an illegal. That's right. But how many of the thousands of people being killed by illegals? To her parents, I say, my heart goes out to you, having lost children myself. I understand. But look, if we change the dynamic at the border, people pay these smugglers $8,000 to get across the border, because they know if they get by and let into the country, it's 6 to 8 years before they have a hearing. And it's worth taking the chance of the $8,000. But if it's only 6 weeks, the idea is it's highly unlikely that people will pay that money and come all that way, knowing that they'll be able to be kicked out quickly.
So if you didn't see the video, you didn't see the transcript, all of that was off script. Biden was, if you didn't see the video, before the speech even began, when Biden was walking into the chamber, as I said, taking his sweet old time, talking to everybody, Marjorie Taylor Greene was on the aisle, handed him a button with the name of Laken Riley, and told her to say her name. And Joe Biden said Lincoln Riley, which is not technically correct, but I guess it's not as bad as flubbing Melania and Mercedes. But Laken Riley, if you didn't know, was a college student who was killed on a walking trail on the University of Georgia's campus back last month. The suspect, who police have identified, is an illegal immigrant who came into the country in 2022, which is a horrible thing that somebody was murdered. But Republicans have since used Riley's killing as a calling card against Biden at the border, because it was an illegal immigrant. Of course, they blocked a bill that I just talked about that would have enforced tougher immigration laws. So, I don't know. Just remember what they actually do, not what they say, because they could say, oh my gosh, this is all Joe Biden's fault, when they didn't even give him the bill to sign in the first place. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't Biden's best moment of the night because it started off by him flubbing the speech, but he picked the button up, which I'm sure his aides and the people who were watching him, who work for him, were like, oh my gosh, no, sir, dude, what are you doing? But he picked the button up and he showed it to the chamber when he said her name. And that's something I don't think Marjorie Taylor Greene expected him to do, because she was filming him while he was walking past. I'm pretty sure she probably thought he was just going to move on, not get the button. He was like, Joe Biden doesn't care. And yet he not only took the button, he showed the button and then said the name. So listen, it's very tricky politics for the Republicans, because they need to convince people that immigration, which is one of the biggest issues right now, they need to convince them it's Joe Biden's fault, but they're the ones who just blocked the bill in Congress. So, you know, it's very tricky politics, because they're going to try and convince people that they're not to blame when they kind of are. Moving on, though, Biden also brought up gun violence, bringing up the elementary school shooting that happened a couple years ago in Uvalde, Texas. And he brought up his predecessor once again in this clip.
With us tonight is Jasmine, whose 9-year-old sister Jackie was murdered with 21 classmates and teachers in elementary school in Uvalde, Texas. Very soon after that happened, Jill and I went to Uvalde for a couple of days. We spent hours and hours with each of the families. We heard their message, so everyone in this room, in this chamber, could hear the same message. The constant refrain, and I was there for hours meeting with every family. They said, do something. Do something. Well, I did do something by establishing the first ever Office of Gun Violence Prevention in the White House, that the Vice President is leading the charge. Thank you for doing it. Meanwhile, my predecessor told the NRA he's proud he did nothing on guns when he was president. Oh. After another shooting in Iowa recently, he said, when asked what to do about it, he said, just get over it. There's his quote, just get over it. I say, stop it. Stop it, stop it, stop it. I'm proud we beat the NRA when I signed the most significant gun safety law in nearly 30 years because of this Congress. We now must beat the NRA again. I'm demanding a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. Pass universal background checks. None of this. I taught the Second Amendment for 12 years. None of this violates the Second Amendment or vilifies responsible gun owners.
So there you go. That was pretty refreshing to hear, because usually only you hear about gun control and gun violence and stuff after a big mass shooting happens, which happens every day, technically, so we really don't hear about it in the news. But then when this massive one happens and we hear about it all over the news, that's when we really get to talk about it. But he just talked about it in the State of the Union speech, which I thought was a good thing. And so, finally, we get to the end of the State of the Union, where he even brought up what the biggest issue is for voters with himself. His age. And I thought Biden concluded this speech pretty strongly. Here is the last part of his speech. Final clip, y'all.
Let me close with this. Yay. I know you don't want to hear any more, Lindsay, but I got to say a few more things. I know it may not look like it, but I've been around a while. When you get to be my age, certain things become clearer than ever. I know the American story. Again and again, I've seen the contest between competing forces in the battle for the soul of our nation. Between those who want to pull America back to the past and those who want to move America into the future. My lifetime has taught me to embrace freedom and democracy, a future based on core values that have defined America: honesty, decency, dignity, equality, to respect everyone, to give everyone a fair shot, to give hate no safe harbor. Now, other people my age see it differently. The American story, of resentment, revenge, and retribution. That's not me. I was born amid World War II when America stood for the freedom of the world. I grew up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and Claymont, Delaware, among working-class people who built this country. I watched in horror as two of my heroes, like many of you did, Dr. King and Bobby Kennedy, were assassinated. And their legacies inspired me to pursue a career in service. I left the law firm and became a public defender because my city of Wilmington was the only city in America occupied by the National Guard after Dr. King was assassinated because of the riots. And I became a county councilman almost by accident. I got elected to the United States Senate when I had no intention of running at age 29. Then vice president, or our first black president. Now president to the first women vice president. In my career, I've been told I was too young. By the way, they didn't let me on the Senate elevators for votes sometimes. Not a joke. And I've been told I'm too old. Whether young or old, I've always known what endures. I've known our North Star. The very idea of America is that we're all created equal and deserve to be treated equally throughout our lives. We've never fully lived up to that idea, but we've never walked away from it either. And I won't walk away from it now. I'm optimistic. I really am. I'm optimistic, Nancy. My fellow Americans, the issue facing our nation isn't how old we are. It's how old are our ideas. Hate, anger, revenge, retribution are the oldest of ideas. But you can't lead America with ancient ideas that only take us back. You lead America, the land of possibilities. You need a vision for the future and what can and should be done. Tonight you've heard mine. I see a future where defending democracy, you don't diminish it. I see a future where we restore the right to choose and protect our freedoms, not take them away. I see a future where the middle class finally has a fair shot and the wealthy have to pay their fair share in taxes. I see a future where we save the planet from the climate crisis and our country from gun violence. Above all, I see a future for all Americans. I see a country for all Americans. And I will always be president for all Americans because I believe in America. I believe in you, the American people. You're the reason we've never been more optimistic about our future than I am now. So let's build the future together. Let's remember who we are. We are the United States of America. And there is nothing beyond our capacity when we act together. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
So there you have it, y'all. The 2024 State of the Union. Overall, you may disagree after watching it and listening to it, but I thought it was a pretty strong speech by Joe Biden, who, as we know, is not the greatest orator. But of his presidency, that was a pretty strong speech, but he knew that many people expected him to be slow, weak, struggling, and yet he often appeared to be opposite. He tackled the biggest issues that voters have, not just with the country, but with him, the economy. He talked about lowering inflation in another clip, talked about immigration and why we have the current setup that we do at the moment, and he talked about his age, too. He made a little joke about that, and I think he showed. He didn't even have to say it, he just showed with his demeanor and how he spoke. And now you can actually take a look at how the opposition is talking about it, that he kind of took care of the old age concerns. That doesn't mean it's still going to show up during the election, but I think Democrats felt a lot better about it now than they did before the speech happened, because he didn't appear very weak. He was strong, angry, some might say. So much so that the opposition has now switched its tune from Biden as a senile, demented old man who would give a tired speech to now saying that he was too angry, too loud, he was too fast at times. Just one person, Ari Fleischer, who was George W. Bush's first White House press secretary, often seen on Fox News these days, he tweeted out, quote, "No one is going to remember a single thing Biden says tonight. Everyone is going to remember how weirdly amped up he is and how bizarrely fast he's speaking," unquote. Certainly different from senile. And he also said in another tweet, quote, "I have to pick up my daughter, so I'm now listening to the speech on my car radio instead of watching it on TV. It's even more bizarre sounding on the radio. This is the weirdest, worst delivered speech I have ever heard. It's just too fast. It's too amped up. Just weird," unquote. How interesting, because one of the things I have been hearing about, looking on conservative media, on the Fox News, on the people who don't really support Joe Biden, is Joe Biden's old. He's senile. This speech is going to be a disaster for him. We should cancel the State of the Union, some Republicans actually said. And yet he goes out. And yet I don't know why they did this, because it happened the same last year, but there were more people watching this year, and it's going to get more attention because it's a presidential election year, and of course the millions, I'm sure, listening on this podcast.
Cool facts, bro.
But they did it last year, too. He overperformed expectations in last year's speech when the Republicans just said he is an idiot, he's demented, he's a puppet. Jill Biden is telling him everything he has to say. Jill Biden is bringing him out of the dead. It's like Weekend at Bernie's. And yet they gave him the lowest bar this year. And he cleared it in the first few minutes. And he hurtled over the bar. I just don't understand why they continue to do that, and then the whole country watches, and it's like, oh, maybe he's not demented or senile. I don't know. But listen, y'all, that was not all that happened Thursday night. I don't know if you all saw, after the State of the Union was the Republican response. As you may know, it is tradition for the opposition party to respond to the State of the Union, and that's what the Republicans did on Thursday night. Representing the GOP was Alabama Senator Katie Britt, who on International Women's Day, the Republican Party decided she should sit down and speak to the American people from her kitchen. And she gave a very inspiring message. Listen to this.
First of all, we see you, we hear you, and we stand with you. Totally normal. Nothing weird about how she was talking. No, that's totally fine. Something else that she said, though, struck many in a different tone, I guess. Let's play a clip of a story she decided to tell during her speech. We know that President Biden didn't just create this border crisis. He invited it with 94 executive actions in his first 100 days. When I took office, I took a different approach. I traveled to the Del Rio sector of Texas. That's where I spoke to a woman who shared her story with me. She had been sex trafficked by the cartels starting at the age of 12. She told me not just that she was raped every day, but how many times a day she was raped. The cartels put her on a mattress in a shoebox of a room, and they sent men through that door over and over again for hours and hours on end. We wouldn't be okay with this happening in a third world country. This is the United States of America, and it is past time, in my opinion, that we start acting like it. President Biden's border policies are a disgrace.
Wow, buddy. That's pretty bad. I'm not joking, that's bad. How could Joe Biden allow this to happen? That's horrible. Well, I hate to break your bubbles, y'all. There's just a little teeny tiny bit wrong with that story. To the Associated Press, who wrote on Sunday, quote, "The Republican senator who gave the party's response to President Joe Biden's State of the Union address used a harrowing account of a young woman's sexual abuse to attack his border policies. But the rapes did not happen in the U.S. or during the Biden administration. The victim has previously spoken publicly about the abuse happening in her home country of Mexico from 2004 to 2008, not in the United States or during the Biden administration. Yet, Britt used the account to chastise Biden's action on the border," unquote. And then, when they were asked by the AP about it, Britt's spokesman confirmed that the story happened in Mexico during the George W. Bush administration, which, if you want to talk about immigration, okay. I mean, I did bring up that the fact that there was an immigration bill, Republicans, like Katie Britt, could have passed, and they didn't. But then you're going to bring up a story from 20 years ago, when Joe Biden was not president. He wasn't even vice president. That not even happened in the U.S. to attack him.
These are not Zander's facts.
That doesn't make any sense. And while we're on the subject of immigration and crimes, we talked about Laken Riley's murder earlier. NPR found just last week that immigrants are less likely to commit crimes than, get ready for it, US-born citizens. Oh my gosh. Research from Stanford University found that immigrants are 60% less likely to be incarcerated than those born in the US, while the Cato Institute, which is a libertarian think tank, by the way, found that in Texas in 2019, undocumented immigrants were 37% less likely to be convicted of a crime. So, those are facts for you, by the way.
These are facts.
It didn't have to be that weird of a speech, you know? Joe Biden gave a pretty good speech. And yet, that response, whatever, kind of was. It was misleading. It was a little creepy. They put a woman in the kitchen on International Women's Day. It was the whole thing. Just, wow. So, y'all, just thought I'd let you know that this is really just the beginning. Because just on Tuesday night of this week, both Biden and Trump clinched their respective nominations for their party's presidential tickets. So, that's going to be the election competition this year, because the 2024 general election is just getting started. We have got 236 days until Election Day. I'm counting down in my brain, and don't be mistaken, y'all, we've got another Biden versus Trump rematch on our hands. Of course, listen, if Aaron Rodgers becomes RFK Jr.'s running mate, then who knows, although I don't know. If Aaron Rodgers doesn't think the Sandy Hook shooting happened, if he thinks it was a hoax, then I don't know how far he's going to go. But I don't know. I did see an RFK sign. I saw a Kennedy sign. I was like, oh my gosh, there's actual people who support this man? There might be one or two, so you never know. But the big one is Biden versus Trump. Of course, Trump was the one who was sitting on his couch watching Biden do his State of the Union last week, and he was mentioned several times during that speech. He was also, if you didn't know, live truthing on Truth Social during the speech, which apparently crashed, so that was kind of a bust. But he did proceed to use what appeared to be Snapchat filters on on the video, which is interesting for a 78-year-old man to post. And he also responded to Biden during a rally he had on Saturday. Listen to this insightful wisdom.
2 nights ago, we all heard Crooked Joe's angry, dark, hate-filled rant of a State of the Union address. Didn't it bring us together? Remember, he said, I'm going to bring the country together. I'm going to bring it together. No. He's a threat to democracy. I will tell you, he's a threat to democracy. Weaponize government, weaponize the FBI, weaponize the DOJ. He's a threat to democracy for other reasons also. Number one, he's grossly incompetent. Joe Biden gave the most divisive, partisan, radical, and extreme speech ever delivered by a president in that chamber. Not even close.
Not even close, buddies. Not even close. I'm so glad I listened. I had no clue Joe Biden was a threat to democracy. News to me. But, of course, Joe Biden is not the only presidential candidate to struggle with his speech at times. Here's just a couple clips that I'll play from just the past 2 weeks.
In Venezuela, did you just see Maduro? Venezuela, it's unbelievable. We're getting rid of the Romneys of the world. We want to get Romneys and those out. But they know that we are the only ones who can stop them. We're the only ones. This is the greatest movement in the history of our country, maybe in the history of any country. Even Argentina, they went MAGA. Argentina, great guy. He's a big Trump guy. He loves Trump. I love him because he loves Trump. When he called, I took his call. Anybody that loves me, I like them. I said, Abdul, he's still there. He's the head of the Taliban. He said, you're killing our soldiers. Don't do it anymore because terror will rain down on you. And he called you, yes, Your Highness. He called me Your Highness, which is interesting. We are a nation that just recently heard that Saudi Arabia and Russia will repeat your...
What was he trying to say? And he just stops. He just... what is he doing? I'm sorry. Sorry, y'all. Again. Oh, wow. That was a good one. That was a good one. By the way, the music in that last clip, that was not added on after. That was being played while he was talking. Oh my gosh. I can't. I'm so sorry. I can't. That was, whoa. Oh man. Okay, listen, y'all. I got a lot more to say, but we've still got many weeks, months, and many podcasts until the election. So for now, I leave you with those facts from the State of the Union. Zander's facts. Topic number 1 we are focusing on this week. So this is the break, y'all. If you need to use the restroom because you can't while you're listening to the facts, I guess. I don't know. Go ahead.
You.
Because now we are talking about college basketball. Sports! One of my favorite weeks of the year. Champ Week. It is time to talk some college hoops, y'all. I don't know if you've looked at the calendar recently. We've made it to March. And you know what that means. College Basketball Conference Tournament Week. ESPN calls it Champ Week, and it is one of my favorite weeks of the year. There are 32 Division I collegiate athletic conferences that sponsor college basketball, and they are hosting their conference tournaments this week, or they did last week. But this is the big week. The big Power 6 conferences of college basketball start their conference tournaments this week. Of course, some other conferences started their tournaments last week, and by the way, if you didn't know, the winner of every conference tournament, 32 teams, automatically qualifies for the NCAA tournament. So it doesn't matter what conference it is. It's important because you win that tournament, you're going to the NCAA tournament. And so far, as of Wednesday, 13 conferences have already concluded their conference tournaments. So the teams that already know that they are going to the tournament are Stetson from the Atlantic Sun, Longwood from the Big South, College of Charleston from the Colonial, Oakland from the Horizon League, Drake from the Missouri Valley, Wagner from the Northeast Conference, Morehead State from the Ohio Valley Conference, Colgate from the Patriot League, Samford from the Southern Conference, McNeese from the Southland Conference, South Dakota State from the Summit League, James Madison from the Sun Belt, and St. Mary's from the West Coast Conference. So those 13 teams already know they're going to be in.
Too many facts.
There's a bunch of teams that are going to be in. They just, I guess, technically aren't locks until the bracket is revealed, but let's be honest, we know. But what about the power conferences, the ones with the biggest schools who likely host the top title contenders for the NCAA tournament, y'all? I've got all the facts you need to know about the ACC tournament, the Big 12 tournament, the Big East, the Big 10, the Pac-12, and the SEC. For the final time, this year is the last year, there will be 6 power conferences in college basketball. It's just like in football, the Pac-12 is going away. Not because of basketball, though, because of football. Because of money! Here we go. Let's go. Power 6 conferences. I'm going to break them all down, break down the top teams, and give you my picks for each of the 6 power conference tournaments that are happening this week. Let's get to it. We're going to start with my favorite conference, y'all. The ACC, because it is first in alphabetical order. The Atlantic Coast Conference Tournament, which began on Tuesday with the first round and ends on Saturday with the championship game. The seeds, North Carolina is number 1, Duke is number 2, Virginia's 3, Pitt's 4. Beyond that, Wake, Clemson, Syracuse, Virginia Tech, Florida State, NC State, Boston College, Notre Dame, Georgia Tech, Miami, and Louisville. If y'all want to know what's happening with 15 seed Louisville, they've already fired their coach, so that's how they're doing. Well, let's start with number 4, North Carolina, number 4 in the AP poll, number 1 in the ACC tournament. They have the top seed in this tournament for the first time since 2017, which is the last time they won the conference regular season title. But the last time that the top seed won this tournament was in 2018. That was Virginia who did that year. But this season for North Carolina, they got the 2 big wins they always dreamt of. They swept their arch rival Duke after the Blue Devils did so last season. Carolina lost just 3 times in the conference, and they are one of 2 ACC teams that is in the top 10 of the NCAA's net rankings. They're number 7, and the Ken Pom rankings, they are number 8. The net rankings, by the way, are what the tournament selection committee uses mostly for, well, they use it in association with many other things, but these are the rankings they supposedly use to help pick teams to be in the tournament and which seed line they should be on. But, so they're one of 2 teams in the top 10 of the net and the Ken Pom in the ACC. Can you guess who the other is? That could be their Tobacco Road nemesis. Number 11 in the AP poll, Duke, who is the 2nd seed in the ACC. And statistically, Duke and Carolina have been by far the 2 best teams in the league this season, led by second-year man Kyle Filipowski, who leads the team in points and rebounds. The Blue Devils have beaten their opponents by an average of 12.97 points per game this season, which is highest in the conference. They are also the defending champions of this tournament. They've been to the final of this tournament the last 2 years. Of course, 2 years ago they lost to the Hokies. But now we're going to talk about Virginia, because the Cavaliers are the 3rd seed in this tournament, yet they are not a lock for the NCAA tournament, which you have told me a couple years ago. The 3rd seed in the ACC tournament is not a lock for the NCAA tournament. That is preposterous. That's what's happening this year, though. Once again, UVA's defense has been wonderful, as it usually is under their head coach, Tony Bennett. They hold opponents to an average of 59 points per game, which is 7 points better than Notre Dame, who is 2nd in that category. That's pretty huge. However, their offense has been horrendous. They only average 63 points per game, which is the worst in the ACC, and 18 points below North Carolina, who leads the league. But Reese Beekman is the league leader in assists, but they'll likely need to win at least 1 game, probably against Clemson, to become a March Madness lock, according to ESPN and their resident bracketologist, Joe Lunardi, who follows this for a living. They are currently in his last 4 in, so they're currently in, but it's close. And by the way, Joe Lunardi is not right 100% of the time. Just gonna let you know. But he's a good reference. Just, you're around there, probably. Number 4 seed is Pittsburgh. Pitt is currently in Joe Lunardi's next 4 out, which means they're not in the tournament. Of course, they could be. It's a projection. The Panthers have been led by Blake Henson this season, though, who was 2nd in the conference in scoring. And while Pitt has 2 big-time road wins at Duke and at Virginia, they have also lost to Wake Forest by 33 points just a couple weeks ago. They'll likely have to beat Wake Forest to make the tournament, and then perhaps they'll have to take down the top seed UNC as well, which could be a little tough for the Pitt Panthers. And then we had a 3-way tie at 5th place. We had Wake Forest, we had Clemson, and we had Syracuse, who all had a conference record of 11-9. Of those teams, only Clemson is a tournament lock, a 6th seed, according to Joe Lunardi. Wake Forest is in the next 4 out, and they could set up a winner goes to the tournament game against Pitt on Thursday. Syracuse likely needs a run to the championship game, though, to get some consideration. This is the first year since 1975 that Syracuse is not being coached by Jim Boeheim. He had been the head coach of Syracuse since 1976.
It's the truth.
Which is wild. And we could have lumped Virginia Tech in that category too of potentially getting into the tournament. They had to beat Florida State on Wednesday and then probably knock off North Carolina. But they decided to be the Chokies and they lost to Florida State. So we're not going to talk about them even anymore. Even though we love them. But in the ACC tournament, North Carolina and Duke are basically tied as co-favorites. The remaining teams are a ways off, according to Las Vegas. But for my ACC tournament pick, not coming from Las Vegas, I'm going to go with Duke. I think they're going to avenge their regular season losses to Carolina in an epic title game on Saturday night. And I think their likely path to the final gives them Virginia in the semifinals, who they'd probably rather see than, like, Clemson, if we're being honest. Virginia, not the most dangerous of teams in this tournament that you could face in the semifinals. So I got Duke winning the ACC tournament, the 2024 New York Life ACC men's basketball tournament, which began Tuesday. It's at Capital One Arena in Washington, D.C. The championship game is set for this Saturday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time on ESPN. All the games can be watched on ESPN, ESPN2, or the ACC network. That's number one. We got 5 more to go. Let's go to the Big 12 Conference, y'all. And it is big. You know, the Big 12 used to have 10 teams. This year they have 14. Next year they'll have 16. It's actually pretty wild. But a new team they have this year is Houston. Houston is the number 1 team in this tournament. They are the number 1 ranked team in the country. And it still feels like they were in the American Athletic Conference like they were last year, y'all. The Cougars have the nation's best defense. Their opponents average just 56.9 points per game, and Juwan Roberts has the lowest defensive rating for any player in America in college basketball, which is pretty good. His teammate Jamal Shed is 3rd in that category, by the way, and in a conference that has 6 teams in the AP Top 25, which is more than any other right now, Houston is the runaway favorite to win the league crown. They also have the top national spots in the aforementioned net rankings and the Ken Palm rankings. They are almost unanimously number 1 at this moment. That doesn't mean they'll win the Big 12 tournament, though. That doesn't mean they'll win the NCAA tournament because it's March Madness. Anything could happen. A team like number 7 Iowa State could beat them because, like Houston, Iowa State's pretty good at defense, too. They're 2nd in the conference, only to Houston. And Tamin Lipsey leads the league in steals and is 4th in the country in that category. And of their 5 conference losses, only their season-ending defeat to Kansas State was against an unranked team at the time. Iowa State has mostly beaten the teams they have needed to, and now they're in the top 10 of the AP poll. Baylor is number 14 in the country. They were the national champions 3 years ago. If y'all remember, that was my first March Madness pick on this podcast, which I made correctly, I might add.
Ugh.
This season, though, they have been dominant on the offensive end. They are one of only 3 conference teams to average over 80 points per game. Of course, times change. The only player left from that national championship squad is Jonathan Shamwa-Chachua, who is averaging just 1 point per game. However, the leading scorer, Jacoby Walker, is averaging nearly 15 points per game. For the Baylor Bears, who have a new arena this year, but they're not going to be able to play in it because they're going to the NCAA tournament, not the NIT. Texas Tech is the 4th seed in this tournament. They are number 25 in the country. The Red Raiders have had 3 different coaches in the last 4 seasons, yet they are still in the top 4 of the Big 12. Under first-year head coach Grant McCasland, Texas Tech beat Kansas by 29 points at home. Kansas is usually pretty good at basketball. And they ended the regular season with a statement 10-point win over Baylor. Pop Isaacs is the leading scorer on their team. He averages 16 points per game. And then you go back, those are the teams that have the double bye in the Big 12 tournament. So the 5 seed is another new team. 4 new teams, as I said. BYU, number 20 in the AP poll. They finished the regular season in 5th. And they proved to be a tough test for teams heading west of Provo. The Cougars lost just twice at home this season to Cincinnati, another new Big 12 team, and Houston. You lose to Houston, that's pretty acceptable. And they got home wins against Baylor and Iowa State while they beat Kansas on the road. Speaking of Kansas, for the first time since 2000, Zander was not alive at that time, Kansas is not in the top 4 of the Big 12 standings. In fact, they're 6th
This is true.
in this new 14-team makeup. Yet, they still rank as the 16th best team, according to the voters of the Associated Press's men's college basketball poll. Yet they do have the top 2 scorers in the Big 12, Kevin McCullough Jr. and Hunter Dickinson. However, neither of those players is going to be able to play in the Big 12 tournament because they are injured, which is not good for Kansas' hopes. They're a lock for the NCAA tournament. All those teams are locked for an NCAA tournament that I just said. But losing your top 2 scorers for the Big 12 tournament is going to hurt, at least for this week, for Kansas. And you've also got Texas and Oklahoma. Both of them in their final year in the conference. They're going to the SEC next year. The Longhorns are the defending champions of this tournament, and they are both projected to be in the NCAA tournament. And TCU is the final team of the 9 currently projected to be in the NCAA tournament by Joe Lunardi. That is the most of any conference. And by the way, after the 6th seed Kansas, Texas is the 7th seed, Oklahoma is the 8th seed, TCU is the 9th seed. Then you've got Kansas State as the 10th seed, and then Cincinnati, UCF, Oklahoma State, and West Virginia round out the Big 12 bracket. So, according to Las Vegas, the favorite is Houston to win the Big 12 tournament, followed by Iowa State and Baylor. And for my Big 12 tournament champion, I feel like it is very hard to pick against Houston. So I'm not going to. I'm going to go with the Houston Cougars. They have dominated the conference in their first year, and their leading scorer, L.J. Cryer, is going to take Houston to the promised land in their first season in the Big 12. How about staking your claim early in the conference? They are going to be the champions of the 2024 Phillips 66 Big 12 Men's Basketball Tournament, which began Tuesday from T-Mobile Center in Kansas City, Missouri. The championship game is set for Saturday at 6 p.m. on ESPN. All the games in that tournament can be watched on ESPN, ESPN2, ESPNU, or ESPN Plus. Lots of ESPNs. How about a conference that has none of their tournament games on ESPN? The Big East Conference, which has the defending national champions, the UConn Huskies. They are number 1 in the Big East this season. Creighton is number 2, followed by Marquette, Seton Hall, and St. John's. They all start in the quarterfinals on Thursday. The first round, though, began on Wednesday, featuring Villanova, the 6th seed, Providence at 7, Butler, Xavier, Georgetown, and DePaul rounding out the bracket. DePaul has not won any games in the conference this season. But let's talk about a team that has. UConn, the defending national champions, who are proving to be title contenders once again this season, not just for this tournament, but for the NCAA tournament as well. Led by Tristan Newton, Alex Caravan, and Donovan Clingan, 3 of their top 4 scorers who were on last year's team. The Huskies have lost just 3 times this season, all of them on the road, and they have lost just once to an unranked opponent who happens to be 4th in this tournament. That would be Seton Hall. And they rank in the top 3 in both the net and the Ken Palm rankings. UConn has the highest scoring offense in the Big East, along with the best defense, which produces a scoring margin that is 6 points better than any other in this conference. However, that does not mean they have the Big East tournament title already in their grasp, because there are a couple of other really good teams in this tournament, like number 8, Creighton. Creighton, number 8 in the AP poll, the second best scoring offense in the league, just 0.4 of a point behind UConn. They might have something to say about UConn's claim to the Big East crown. They are one of 3 teams to take down UConn this year, and they're also in the top 10 of the AP poll. They're led by top scorers Baylor Shireman, Trey Alexander, Ryan Kalkbrenner, the 3rd, 5th, and 6th highest scorers in the Big East. Creighton is the only school in the Big East to have 3 players in the top 10 in scoring in the conference.
It's a fact.
The Blue Jays are another title contender for the national crown out of the Big East. And the Big East might be perhaps the only conference that has 3 legitimate national championship contenders. There might be another conference or 2 that could say that. But we've got UConn, we've got Creighton. Let's round it out with the Golden Eagles from Milwaukee, Marquette. My preseason pick to win this conference. Shaka Smart's team has not disappointed, even though they weren't able to top the Big East. but they still got pretty close. And led by Tyler Kolek, whose 7.6 assists per game are the most in college basketball. Marquette beat Kansas in November's Maui Invitational when the Jayhawks were ranked number 1. They also beat Creighton at home, but they did lose to them when they went to Omaha this year. So, I don't know. We'll see. But those are 3 top 10 teams in the AP poll in one conference. And then we've got Seton Hall. Despite the 4th seed in this conference, Seton Hall, like I said with the ACC, Virginia, 3rd seed, not a lock. Seton Hall may not be a total lock for the big tournament. They may need a win against 5th seed St. John's on Thursday, whom they did beat twice in the regular season, so they could feel good about that. But considering they did beat UConn and Marquette this season, I think they should be dancing next week in the big tournament. The big dance. 3 other Big East schools, though, who are basically on the bubble for the tournament. The aforementioned St. John's, who I'll mention more about this next week. Next week, by the way, if you didn't know, we're having our March Madness bracket exclusive reveal podcast, so you might want to tune in for that. St. John's have been incredibly intriguing, though, to witness under their head coach, Rick Pitino, who has had some things to say about his team this season, which we'll probably talk about next week, because they'll be in the tournament, most likely, along with a Providence team that was ranked at the beginning of Big East play. They are no longer, and we've likely got a win and in game with Seton Hall and St. John's. Providence needs to beat Georgetown on Wednesday, and then possibly Creighton, and there's also Villanova, who needs to beat DePaul. If they don't beat DePaul, I'm sorry, Villanova, you don't deserve the NIT, because DePaul has not won a conference game, and would probably like to upset Marquette, Villanova would, to ensure they're playing meaningful basketball next week. So, as you would expect, UConn are the heavy favorites for this tournament. Creighton and Marquette are next up, and who can blame the odds makers, because UConn has been dominant in this conference this season. So I'm going to go with UConn to win the Big East tournament as well. They've shown that they are up to the task once again, and they have a great shot at becoming the first team to go back-to-back, winning the national title since Florida did it in 2006 and 2007. I've got UConn winning the 2024 Big East Men's Basketball Tournament presented by Jeep, which began Wednesday from the Mecca Madison Square Garden in New York City. The championship game is set for this Saturday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time on Fox. All of the games in that tournament can be watched on either Fox or FS1. 3 down, y'all. 3 to go. To the Big Ten, the B1G, with 14 teams and 18 teams starting next year. Their name needs to change. Purdue, though, has been the biggest of all the Big Ten teams this season. They are number 1 in the Big Ten, number 3 in the AP poll. But going through the bracket, Illinois, Nebraska, and Northwestern round out the top 4 who got the double byes in the Big Ten tournament, followed by the 5th seed, Wisconsin, Indiana, Iowa, Michigan State, Minnesota, and Ohio State. And then the teams that played on Wednesday in the first round, Penn State, Maryland, Rutgers, and Michigan finished in last. But I want to start at the top with Purdue. Purdue, I don't want to go crazy. I'm just asking, could Purdue be this year's Virginia? If you don't remember, Purdue, a number 1 seed in the tournament last year, the NCAA tournament, became just the second number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament to lose to a number 16 seed when they fell to Fairleigh Dickinson. Y'all remember that? That was wild times. We're going to get some madness next week. It's going to be fun. When Virginia did that in 2018, they lost to UMBC and everybody, oh my gosh, greatest day of my life. Not really. They won the national championship the next year, which wasn't the greatest day of my life. Purdue has the pieces to do that, though. They could be the next Virginia. They could win the national championship this year. Zach Edey, once again, is dominating. His 24.2 points per game are tied for most in college basketball, and his 11.7 rebounds per game are 3rd best in the sport. And among players in the Power 6 conferences, that is ranked number 1.
Nice fact.
And Purdue is the other team to rank in the top 3 of both the net and the Ken Palm rankings. And you've got Braden Smith, Lance Jones, and Fletcher Lawyer, who have all proven to be capable scorers. But the team still runs through Zach Edey. If he has an off night, that could prove trouble, as it has a couple times when Purdue has lost. They are not undefeated. No team is undefeated in college basketball this season, at least in Division I. So that's the top seed, Purdue. The second seed is Illinois. They're number 13 in the AP poll. Last season, if you remember my national championship pick from the beginning of last season, my college basketball preview was Illinois. And that turned out to be a massive dud. I don't know if they made the tournament. But the Fighting Illini may not be championship caliber this season, but they're definitely a lot better than they were last season. Terrence Shannon Jr.'s 21.6 points per game would be the best in any other Power 6 conference. Unfortunately, he's with Zach Edey in the Big Ten, so it's not the top of the Big Ten. But he's been an engine for Illinois' offense, the fourth best when adjusted by Ken Palm, which at 83.9 points per game is just 0.3 points below Purdue for most in the Big Ten. Those are the two big teams, Purdue and Illinois this season. And then you go to Nebraska. Nebraska 1 year ago was the 11th seed in this tournament, and they lost the first round to Minnesota, who was the last place team in the tournament last year. This year, Nebraska is one of 4 teams who have earned a double bye and is one of 3 teams to have beaten Purdue this year, which not even Illinois was able to do, by the way. Although Nebraska couldn't beat Illinois, they lost on the road by just 3 points. But still, that's pretty impressive. You lose by just 3 points on the road in Champaign. The Cornhuskers are a threat, though. They are the only Power 6 school to have never won a game in the NCAA tournament. And that right there is motivation. Northwestern, remember that only 3 teams beat Purdue this season. Northwestern is one of them. They beat Purdue on the first day of December 2023. Remember the name of Boo Buie, y'all. Boo Buie. Not just because it's an awesome name, but because he could do some damage later this month. He averages almost 19 points per game for the Wildcats. All 4 of those teams are solidly in the tournament. Michigan State is currently on the bubble. They started out the year, if you remember, number 3 in the AP poll. They certainly didn't expect to be here at the end of the season, but they lost their season opening game at home to JMU, which JMU's in the tournament, so maybe that wasn't so bad, but they were also number 3 at the time. That was bad. They still have gotten some quality wins this season, though, against Baylor and against Illinois. And they have Tom Izzo, a legendary coach in college basketball. Michigan State's probably going to be in the tournament. Iowa's also on the bubble, though. They're just outside of the tournament, according to Joe Lunardi. And beating Ohio State on Thursday would be massive for the Hawkeyes. And, getting Caitlin Clark on their team would be helpful, too. But I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think the NCAA would allow that, no matter how hard they played. As expected, Purdue is favored to win the tournament, although Illinois is not that far behind. Nebraska, Michigan State, and Wisconsin are up next, according to Las Vegas, the odds makers. But for this pick, I'm going to go a bit against the grain. I'm going to go with Nebraska to win the Big Ten title, not just because I like saying Nebraska. If Illinois has to face Ohio State in their first game on Friday, it's going to be an absolute battle, because Ohio State, they're the 10th seed in this tournament, but they have resurged since firing their coach, Chris Holtmann, in February. They have beaten Purdue since that point. They're kind of ticked it up a little bit. But even if Ohio State doesn't beat Iowa, Iowa would still be a battle for Illinois. I like Nebraska against whoever their semifinal opponent is, and they've already shown they can beat Purdue. Give me the Cornhuskers of Nebraska. They wish they were super good at football. I'm sorry, you're just going to have to settle for basketball. Nebraska will win,
If you say so,
the 2024 TIAA Big Ten Men's Basketball Tournament, which began on Wednesday from the Target Center in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The championship game is set for this Sunday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time on CBS. All of those games in the tournament can be watched on either Peacock, the Big Ten Network, or on CBS. By the way, that CBS game happens at 3:30, and then immediately we get the bracket reveal. Oh my gosh. March! I love this. Pac-12. I don't love this, though. Let's go to the Pac-12. This is the final time we will be talking about the Pac-12 men's basketball tournament on this podcast, y'all. Because the Pac-12 is going away. I told y'all why earlier. The Pac-12 is going away, and so this is the final time Pac-12 basketball is going to be played. Shout out to you, my West Coast friends. Let's take a look at this tournament, though. Arizona's the number 1 seed, followed by Washington State, who's number 2. Colorado and Oregon follow them up. They all got the single bye, because there's 12 teams in the Pac-12 tournament. And the teams who began play on Wednesday, starting with the 5th seed UCLA, followed by Utah, California, Washington, USC, the 9 seed, 10 seed Stanford, followed by Arizona State, and then Oregon State is the 12th seed in the Pac-12 tournament. Let's begin with Arizona, the top team in the Pac-12, the 6th best team in America, according to the AP poll. Under their head coach, Tommy Lloyd, the Wildcats have been an absolutely dominant regular season team, but they haven't been a dominant tournament team. Not the Pac-12 tournament. They've won the Pac-12 tournament the last 2 years, and they're the favorites to win it for a final time this year. I'm talking about the NCAA tournament. In Tommy Lloyd's past 2 years, they've been top seeds of the tournament, and they have not gotten past the Sweet 16. But Arizona's offense this year is not just good. It is on fire, ladies and gentlemen. They average 89.5 points per game, 9 points better than second place of the conference, and that is second in America.
Spitting the truth.
UNC transfer Caleb Love has made a world of difference. He averages 18.7 points per game, and while Umar Ballo averages 10 rebounds per game, his 64% field goal percentage is also 8th best in the United States of America. On offense alone, Arizona is a national title contender, yet they need not to repeat their first round exit of last year when they were a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament. But again, as I said, they are the 2-time defending champions of this Pac-12 tournament. And listen, the Pac-12 went out with a bang in football. The football season was amazing to watch in the fall in the Pac-12. Maybe not in men's basketball, though. Washington State is number 22. They're the only other ranked team right now in the conference. And when they entered the AP poll earlier this year, they had done so for the first time in 302 weeks. If you can do math, that is a long time. But the Cougars were the only team to beat Arizona not once, but twice this season. They got a rare win in Tucson as well. Isaac Jones and Miles Rice both average over 15 points per game, but they did lose the regular season finale to in-state foe Washington. They will not like that. They could beat Washington in the championship game. I don't think that's going to happen, though, because Washington is the 8th seed. Washington has already informed their coach also that he will not be retained for next season when they're in the Big Ten. And Colorado is not going to the Big Ten. They're going to the Big 12. Colorado was my dark horse pick to win the conference this year, though, the Colorado Buffaloes. They didn't do too bad. They finished just 2 games behind Arizona in the Pac-12, so I'd say if that was a dark horse pick, that's pretty good. They are the only team in the conference to shoot at least 40% from 3. That doesn't hurt. But they're currently in Joe Lunardi's last 4 in. They're not a lock. They'll need to beat the winner of Utah and Arizona State on Thursday to probably assure themselves a berth in the NCAA tournament. They won this tournament in their first year in the conference. That was back in 2012 when they came from the Big 12, and they hope to win it in their last year too before they move back to the Big 12. Oregon is the 4th seed, the Oregon Ducks, who appear to be all over the place year after year. Sometimes they're the best team in America, sometimes they're not in the tournament. They need more help than Colorado to get into the tournament this year. They need a win against UCLA or Oregon State, and then probably against Arizona, which probably isn't going to happen, I'm sorry to say. Arizona, they're obviously the favorites for the Pac-12 crown, though. Colorado and Washington State follow closely behind. So in my estimation, only a fool wouldn't pick Arizona to win the Pac-12. And ladies and gentlemen, friends of the podcast, fact-filled listeners, I am no fool. They will win their 3rd straight Pac-12 title before heading off to the Big 12 next year. I think they'll face Colorado in that game, who will beat Washington State in the semifinals. Just so you know, Arizona is going to win the 2024 Pac-12 men's basketball tournament presented by Acura, which began on Wednesday from T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, Nevada. The championship game is set for Saturday at 9 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time on Fox, and all of the games in this tournament can be watched on the Pac-12 network, on FS1, or on Fox. One more conference to go, y'all. Does it just mean more? The SEC. Oh my gosh, darlings. It just means more in the Southeastern Conference, y'all. It meant more for Tennessee this year. For the first time since 2008, they won the conference regular season title. If you remember, though, 2008 was an interesting year for the SEC tournament because they were playing the tournament in the Georgia Dome, which was the football stadium before Mercedes-Benz Stadium was there in Atlanta. and a tornado caused damage to the Georgia Dome while the tournament was going on, and so they had to move the remaining games to Georgia Tech's arena. Tennessee, so that was the last year Tennessee won the SEC regular season crown.
Story time!
They do hope that this tournament turns out better than the 2008 version, which they lost, and more like 2 years ago when they won the SEC tournament. And there's one name to know when you watch Tennessee, that is Dalton Knecht, whose 21.4 points per game are best in the conference, and he is the SEC Player of the Year, ladies and gentlemen. It just meant more for him. And Tennessee's defense is also second best in the conference, and their dominance has been shown with wins over every other conference foe, not named Mississippi State. They couldn't get over the mighty Bulldogs from Stark Vegas. Tennessee is number 1 in this tournament. Kentucky is number 2. Alabama is number 3. Auburn's number 4. They got the double byes. Teams that started in the second round, South Carolina was the 5th seed. Florida, Texas A&M, Mississippi State, LSU, and Ole Miss. And the teams that started play in the first round, the 11th seed is Georgia, followed by Arkansas, Vanderbilt, and Missouri. Missouri also did not win a conference game this season, which is a little depressing. But I want to talk about something that's not depressing. That is the Kentucky Wildcats, who are number 9 in the AP poll this season. The advanced metrics don't like Kentucky as much as they like Tennessee. But there's no reason to scoff at the Wildcats because their 89.5 points per game that they average this season is tied with Arizona for second most in the country, yet it's only second most in the SEC. We'll talk about that in just a second. UK has scored over 100 points 6 times this season, again, second most of the conference, but that's still a rather impressive feat. This is not the NBA, this is college basketball. Antonio Reeves' 20 points per game have been assisting that offense, while Rob Dillingham and SEC Freshman of the Year Reed Shepherd each average at least 12.5 points per game. And another thing to watch, Kentucky is first among power conferences, averaging 6.2 blocks per game this season. How about that? So that team that averages over 89.5 points per game, they've scored over 100 points more than 6 times this season. They've got to be, incredible, right? Well, they are the number 19 team in the country. Alabama, the Crimson Tide, who don't only need Nick Saban to be proud of their state, because they've got Tommy Tuberville as their senator too. The Tide have crossed the century mark 9 times this season, but they've also lost 2 games, having allowed over 100 points. Yes, Alabama's offense is the best in America, but their defense is the worst in the power conferences, and of 363 teams in Division I, they give up the 353rd most points per game. That is atrocious. And Alabama is 2-7 against teams that are ranked in the AP poll this season. That is far worse than the other 4 teams in the SEC that are ranked. In fact, it is the only losing record against ranked teams. Among those is Distinguished 5.
That's a lot of facts.
Which also include South Carolina and Alabama's arch rival, Auburn. Speaking of Alabama's arch rival, let's go down to the Plains. Number 12, Auburn. They're the 4th seed in this tournament. Kentucky, Alabama, and Auburn, they were actually all tied for 2nd in the conference this year, but tiebreakers forced Auburn to fall to 4th. The Tigers often beat the teams they needed to, but they couldn't get over the hump of Tennessee and Kentucky. They were, though, able to exact revenge of an earlier defeat to Alabama, coming up 1 point short of that century mark in that game, by the way. So could have been 3 games that Alabama gave up 100 points and lost. And while they weren't able to get a double bye, number 15 South Carolina still had a massively impressive season. It wasn't just Kentucky, Alabama, and Auburn who went 13-5 in the conference this year. So did South Carolina. Because while the media at the beginning of the season, before a game had been played, they did correctly pick Tennessee to win the conference, they were certainly not in the right choosing South Carolina to finish in last place of the conference. The Gamecocks beat both Kentucky and Tennessee. They did suffer a 40-point drubbing at the hands of Auburn earlier this year, but they got the 5th seed. They are number 15 in the country, and they're going to the NCAA Tournament. Joe Lunardi, by the way, projects the SEC to get 7 teams in the NCAA Tournament, second most of the Big 12, including Mississippi State, but not Texas A&M. The Bulldogs are likely in if they beat LSU on Thursday. A&M, Brent likely needs to beat Ole Miss and possibly Kentucky. But remember, 2 years ago, the Aggies were an 8th seed. They made it all the way to the championship game in this tournament. So as a 7 seed, anything is possible, I suppose. Florida is another lock for the tournament. They got wins over Auburn, Alabama, and Kentucky this season. And overall, in the SEC, Tennessee are the favorites to win the tournament, but Auburn, Kentucky, and Alabama, they are all not too far behind right there. So, for my final conference prediction on this Champ Week podcast, you've got a ton of teams who I think could reasonably win this tournament. But at my eyes, as Travis Scott said, look in my eyes, tell me a tale. Do you see the road, the map to my soul? My eyes are all on Kentucky. Alabama's offense may be America's best, but being tied for second ain't too bad either. That's Kentucky. We could get an Alabama-Kentucky semifinal matchup, which might break the record for highest scoring game in the SEC tournament. But Alabama's defense is too liable. Kentucky's isn't much better, but I trust their scorers more, too. I like them against Alabama. I like them against Tennessee or Auburn in the title game, which would also be a very fun semifinal to watch, by the way. So I like Kentucky winning the 2024 SEC Men's Basketball Tournament, which begins Wednesday from Bridgestone Arena in Nashville, Tennessee. The championship game is set for Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern on ESPN. All the games in that tournament can be watched on the SEC network or on ESPN. So those are your 6 power conferences, y'all. But of course, those are not the only conference tournaments going on. Here's a couple of the other conference tournaments just to keep your eye on. I've got 2 specifically. You've got the American Athletic Conference. They no longer have their superpower in Houston, but Florida Atlantic, remember, was in the Final Four last season. They're projected to be in the tournament. South Florida and Memphis may need some help this week to get into the tournament, though. Then there's the Mountain West. They could get as many as 6 teams in the tournament. Number 18, Utah State. Number 23, Nevada. Boise State, Colorado State, and San Diego State, who was last season's national title runner-up, by the way. They're all projected to be in the tournament. New Mexico is the one who could make it 6 with some wins this week. It is absolutely real that the Mountain West Conference could get more teams announced in the tournament than the ACC and the Pac-12, and maybe even the Big Ten, which is sad for the ACC. But those are 2 other tournaments to watch this week, and just a reminder of the remaining conference championship games to be played this week, because again, those games decide who goes to the tournament. On Wednesday, you've got the Big Sky tournament, Big Sky. Saturday, the America East, the Big West, the Conference USA, the MAC with 2 A's, the MAC with 1 A, the MEAC, the Mountain West, the SWAC, and the WAC. All those conferences are holding their conference tournament championship games on Saturday. And then Sunday, the American, the Atlantic 10, and the Ivy League as well, alongside the SEC and the Big Ten. And just so you have an idea of the bubble for the NCAA tournament, here are Joe Lunardi's teams on the bubble as of Tuesday night. The last 4 byes, so close to almost getting out: Michigan State, Seton Hall, TCU, Mississippi State. The last 4 teams in, according to Joe Lunardi: Colorado, Virginia, St. John's, and Indiana State. The first 4 out, these teams are out of the tournament, going to the NIT, I'm sorry. Texas A&M, New Mexico, Wake Forest, and Villanova. And the next 4 out, Pittsburgh, Iowa, Providence, and Memphis. So again, Joe Lunardi is not right 100% of the time, but it gives you a good idea of where your team is, you know? So, there you have it, y'all. Champ Week. There is the fact-filled look at all the college basketball conference tournaments that are going on this week. The basketball this week is going to be incredible if you like college basketball, because it's one of the best weeks of the year. It's Champ Week. The conference tournaments, as I said, they last until Sunday, and the selection show, where the 68 teams who will be in the tournament are revealed, will be this Sunday at 6 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time on CBS. And remember to check out Zander's Weekend Facts this Sunday morning, our newsletter, for a recap of the action that's already happened and what we will see in Sunday's finals. Plus, I'll give you the latest updates on which bubble teams could be in and which could be staying home just a couple hours before the selection show happens. So make sure to tune into the newsletter that comes out Sunday morning. Check that out. And of course, we're going to do it again for the 4th time. Y'all, next week, we're going to have my exclusive bracket reveal right here on the Zander's Facts podcast, which you're not going to want to miss, by the way. Do you know who has predicted the national champion correctly 2 of the last 3 years? If you didn't, that would be me. I mean, listen, we had a rough time last year. Texas, they went to the Elite Eight. They lost to Miami. Miami is terrible this year. I don't know. But we're going to get back on track next year. So you might want to listen to next week's podcast, which is going to come out at a more reasonable time on Wednesday, I'm sure, because it's going to have some major facts. That's like one of my favorite podcasts we do every single year. I love that. Okay. Those are all the facts I have for college basketball and the State of the Union. Y'all, that is episode 135 of the Zander's Facts podcast. Thank you all so much for listening. Whoa. Those were a lot of facts. Remember that if you liked all the facts we had on this podcast, remember to follow this podcast, download this episode, rate and review the podcast, check us out on all the socials, Threads, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, at Zander's Facts. That's Zander with a Z. Most importantly, remember to tell all your friends, y'all. Spread the facts, tell all your friends about the podcast, the newsletter, Zander's Weekend Facts, and Zander's Facts on YouTube as well. You should go check out Zander's Facts on YouTube because all our new episodes, including this one, get posted to YouTube with a nice background. You can watch, subscribe. It'll be cool. Go do that, and also check out the Zander's Facts link tree because it has all the Zander's Facts links that you need. So, y'all, that is a wrap on episode 135. Sorry it had to come out late on Wednesday. Listen, it takes a lot of work getting these facts together, okay? And you know what? The podcast, it'll come when it wants to, okay? Just don't take that out of context, please. That was episode 135. Episode 136 coming up next week, as I said, our exclusive March Madness bracket reveal. If you don't listen to next week's podcast, you are dead to me. Listen to it, download it, tell all your friends that the biggest podcast of the year so far is coming up next week on the Zander's Facts podcast. Wednesday morning, I am positive, I am promising you, pinky swear, it is coming out Wednesday morning, so you can have time to prepare your brackets as well before Thursday and the tournament starts. You're welcome. So, that is it, y'all. That is a wrap on episode 135 of the Zander's Facts podcast. Thank you all so much for listening, and we'll see y'all with episode 136 next week.
We are a nation that just recently heard that Saudi Arabia and Russia will repeat.